I would like to introduce Ben Lowder. Ben is an artist. He's also a curator. He's also a board member at the Buckminster Fuller Dome. He lives in Carbondale, Girard, Illinois, near Carbondale, where there's a lot of auspicious geography, which we'll be talking about in a moment. I'd also like to invite LA Weekly Arts editor, Shana Nys Dambrot. We are fortunate to have her with us tonight. She and Ben actually have a long history of conversation, and we're going to continue that tonight. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how we structured this. We have a whole slide backup set up here to be able to bring up images as we talk, but it's not a linear program. We wanted to really preserve the conversation aspect of it. And make sure that that worked well. But since we don't have the gallery right next to us, I have images of Ben's work, a lot of the symbology he talks about and addresses and that inspired him. And I'd like to actually, if it's okay, I'd like to start by going through some of the works. We'll put them on the screen and have you talk a little bit about it. And Shana, if you want to jump in, please do. Here's one.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that one.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that one is actually a piece that I made a few years ago and then kind of remixed for this exhibition because it was initially titled Formation. And, you know, this show, thanks to your input, was titled Splendor and Formation. So, and that piece, I mean, it felt good, but it needed a little something extra. So I took the opportunity to kind of rework it for this show. And yeah, I like the way it turned out. It's probably the most like painterly piece or.
It's very painterly, and it feels that way to me. You know, if I stood at a distance, middle ground, close up, I felt I was having a different relationship with it. And actually, I buried the lead here because Ben works with a lot of sacred geometry, but he also uses as source material vintage advertising, signage, and reclaimed wood, and then repurposes it. I want you to talk about that a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, the red elements of that is text from a sign that was originally hung on the Mississippi River in Alton, Illinois, near Route 66. That's near our home. So, you know, a lot of, you know, early advertising was done on barns and other buildings along Route 66. And in the process of tearing down barns to build our house out of reclaimed materials, we got a little collection of old vintage metal advertising that has become the medium for this work. Those two material pieces, the reclaimed wood and the vintage metal signage. You know, it had kind of a personal resonance for me at the time because I was doing commercial art and advertising and post-home construction. I was so inspired about the geometry of aligning architecture with the natural environment through, you know, design principles that are generally called passive solar, where you align it with seasonal sun angles. And that I wanted to, honestly, I was really boring everyone in my life about the details and the math involved in designing your home in that way. And I needed an outlet for it. So the initiation of this art series, which I called Myth, Math, and Magic, and I've talked to Shana on a couple different occasions about before tonight, was born of an effort to personally stop making advertising, and then kind of like that seemed to, you know, have also a larger resonance culturally and socially, that, you know, the advertising was maybe promoting you know, unsustainable choices for us collectively around consumerism and things. Right. So you know, it had a couple layers, and the layers just kind of keep growing around it. That I would have thought I may have exhausted that series by now, if you would have asked me, back then, but I feel like there's still more for it to say, so.
Very quickly, I have a slide up of your house right now, and I just wanted to point out something that when Ben and I first met, and I want to get into myth magic and yeah. Yeah, no. We're all a little slap happy. But when Ben and I first met, we were introduced by Kelly here at PRS, and we actually met at a coffee shop in Santa Monica for a half-hour meeting that went on for about 4 hours. And one of the things that he told me about was his home. And so here is a schematic of it. But the thing that's really remarkable about it is he took into consideration where the sun would be at different times of year so that the sun would naturally warm it during the winter and actually be prevented from getting inside and keeping it warm in the summer. So you can see here, you have the angle where the summer solstice is, and it's actually not going inside the house. And during the winter solstice, it is. And it's just a very simple way of orienting the property, or the building rather, to the sun to conserve energy, which is just, I love the simplicity of that. And it's kind of depressing when you think that so much of our grid system is not oriented that way, and therefore doesn't make use of this. There's a lot of interesting things about buildings and the way that they use energy. Some of them are counterintuitive, like Stuart Brand points out that apartment buildings are actually in some ways more energy efficient because all the warmth is going from unit to unit and keeping the hive, as it were, warm. But in other instances, it's not. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys saw it. And it's also quite a beautiful home, as you can see. And
yeah, it really was the using those materials and falling in love with the patina, and just how the age of the material is a static object, but it communicates time, and all of that was just all very inspiring. And then the geometry.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, when we first met, right, that was the thing that sort of that we started talking about, was how all of these different elements that are active in the work and the architecture and the way your relationship to the earth and things, they're all kind of just facets of one big idea about, what reality really is and how to be in reality. So we were talking, kind of joking before, about, what is time? But when you said about specifically making brand new works that are responding to the present moment in our culture and our zeitgeist and what's needed in our community spiritual health, or your personal research into, for example, the legacy of Buckminster Fuller, that you have interest in making the work, but then you're making this decision to make them out of materials that have this whole backstory, that were made and used and discarded and buried, left outside in the elements, mostly, that advertising, you're understanding it as a pernicious thing you need to get out from under. But those signs are nostalgic, but nostalgic for what? Because the 50s were not amazing for most people, actually. So then, there's this sort of endless spiral of all of these interconnected things, and you get from, oh my God, I love grape knee-high, to systemic capitalism and the artificial binaries imposed on us are ruining our common humanity, so fast. And that weird place is where your work lives for me. And I'm just completely obsessed with how the process by which it goes from one to the other. And the answer has to do with the geometry in large part.
Yeah.
The same geometry that you were kind of measuring when it was time to situate your house.
It is exactly it. I mean, that was the basic, orientation to the seasonal sun angles of the solstices, the winter solstice, December 21st, 22nd, June 21st, summer solstice. You use the Pythagorean theorem to figure out what the angle is to orient the height of your wall and everything. So, Pythagoras has a deep esoteric whole religion around him that I reacquainted myself with through the research process. And among, it's just generally the way people were building pre-industrial revolution took more into account of the natural world. So it was like, it worked with nature rather than against it. And just seeing, using that as the reference point and the cornerstone, or the, truth with a capital T, it turns out to be efficient. It turns out to be, beautiful and aesthetically pleasing, just by aligning with nature. And that gave like new context to a lot of things I'd been introduced academically that only kind of had this kind of a book learning version, one of which was Buckminster Fuller. And, folks like Louis Sullivan, saying form follows function. It's like, okay, well, that sounds right. But then,
What is the function?
Exactly, and that quote, the longer version of that quote actually accounts for nature. It says, in all things, man-made and nature, form ever follows function. So like, the crucible of evolution has given us these repeated forms and patterns. And if they're informed our man-made things with them, then they will be blessed, anointed, efficient. And, that sets you all primed up for the reintroduction to Bucky's legacy, which is, he gave his entire life's energy towards revealing all of that work. And I, this is a lot of things that just happened coincidentally, intuitive,
Coincidentally.
right, meaningful, coincidental. Well, yeah, because we live in Southern Illinois. Buckminster Fuller spent a really important decade of his life in Southern Illinois at Southern Illinois University. And my father attended SIU, I attended SIU. So it was through, building that house and then deciding to make a change. Bucky's legacy was something I really used as well. If I'm not going to advocate on behalf of whoever's willing to pay me to do commercial art, what would I advocate? And it was Bucky's legacy that I really felt good about promoting.
And I just wanted to touch on that too, because one of the reasons that Ben was excited to show here, and I was excited to show his work here, is that he listened to Manly Hall's lectures as he was working. He's very informed by Buckminster Fuller, and I'm just going to use this as a moment to get a little something in there, which is that those you might think are rational often have a mystical side, and those who you would think are mystical often have a rational side. And so one of my favorite quotes of Buckminster Fuller's is, "One goes inside to go outside oneself and into the center of the earth, and thence outward to the stars." Not exactly what you would expect from a nuts and bolts person speaking. And then Manly Hall, conversely, who is known for exploring many mythic belief systems and strategies, says the unfolding of man's spiritual nature is as much an exact science as astronomy, medicine, or jurisprudence. And I bring these up because I feel like Ben is both those things. He has that practical side, as you see with his house. And then he also has a very spiritual side, mystical side, that gets into the sacred geometry. I'm going to throw in one last quote before we jump into the next, but it's, "Physicists do not need mysticism and mystics do not need physics, but humanity needs both." And I think that's a powerful.
And that's really like one of the main themes that run through this exhibition here at PRS is the integration of duality, like in dualistic thinking. It just feels like us as a species are at a threshold that we need to integrate in order to move forward.
Absolutely.
And accept paradox. Two things can be conflicting information.
Amen.
We can hold them
Insane.
truth, simultaneous.
Yeah.
And that quote that you gave from Bucky is from the miniature Earth dome that he built in Edwardsville, and which is a great, example of integrating of polarities. He's, saying that you go into this miniature Earth, and then because it's translucent, you can shoot out to the cosmos in an instant. And it's a really transformative space to go in and be in. And it encapsulates a lot of the wisdom traditions that are present here at PRS in Hermetic traditions. Hermetic traditions are about integrating polarities. The exterior of this building is convex, the interior is concave. It's both that, and that whole kind of inside and outside ideas of, integrating those are all Hermetic wisdom tradition. Even the idea that Bucky wanted you to, through that architectural experience, to be the human individual within the heart of the planet, to look out and see the macroorganism of the planet, and then zoom out to see the macroprosophos of the universal.
Right.
And then back down into the particular and then realize that it's unbroken.
Right.
And that, that's a real Hermetic exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I've said this to you a million times, and I've said it many, but I think paradox, the ability to describe and portray paradox, is actually art's kind of superpower, right? I think, art can portray two simultaneously coexisting oppositional forces, situations, what laws of physics, who cares, perspective, what time periods, whatever you need, all at once, and it's fine. In a way that language cannot, which is, just to like sneak preview your talk later in the month, but in that, the way that humans adopted post-pictographic linguistics has reinforced the dominion of linear time on the way that we perceive every aspect of existence.
Preach, sister.
Because literally you have to say one word at a time in a row.
Yeah.
Right? Just fundamentally.
Yeah.
So that there's, but that there is another way of thinking and being and perceiving that is much more simultaneous and much more metaversal. And that we're sort of conditioned to think, we know that exists, but it's just a dream. But art is something that can make it very real and can collapse a lot of these threads that we're taught are parallel and oppositional into these amazing singularities. And we've all experienced it and for different reasons. And, to my mind, art, and if you have to work in language, poetry pretty much only.
Well, because poetry is about collision, and out of that collision comes paradox, and out of that comes meaning. Yeah.
It still kind of has to subvert the convention. So it's better, right, than regular old language. But that's, I think that's the attraction of poetry, is that it disrupts that a little bit. And so, that's something that art, I think, in general does. Like I said, it's a superpower. But in your case, I think that there's a level of intentionality about creating that, that sets it apart. So, that's just when I hear you guys talking about, these Hermetic traditions, and I think I look at Bucky and I'm listening to, the mystic, amazing quotes, and everything is both literal and a metaphor. But you know what? The buildings he built stand. Like, they're really good, solid buildings. They're not experimental, flimsy, collapsed 15. They're very serious architecture. And that's what you were saying about the pragmatic expression of these mystical ideas is just like another set of those things that should not be a binary, right? And don't have to be, because look.
Yeah.
So
no,
that's
I think
how I feel about your work. So that's what I'm here to do. They talk and I go, and you can see it in the work.
Right.
Back to you.
Thanks for bringing it back to the work.
Soccer commentator over here, but that's my job. I'm here to do it.
I like what you said, though, because that's so true. And here at PRS, there's a lot of conversation about language and how that's an order that's imposed over what is. And I always think of Krishnamurti, who says, the minute you start to categorize, it's a violent act. And I think that's really true. You're not looking at what is anymore. You're looking at a segment of it, and that's problematic. I actually wanted to just get back to, with that in mind, to the origin of Splendor and Formation, because you were telling me about texts that you were aware of and that Bucky was aware of, and that Manly Hall was aware of,
Yes.
that relate to this. and that would be these bad boys.
Love this part.
Well, yeah. So, choosing to work with deconstructing language was just the materials that I had at hand, through post home construction, all these metal signs, comprised of phonetic language structure that I felt a desire to chop up and deconstruct. And then, the decision, well, what would you reconstruct? We triangulated works that reference Buckminster Fuller and ancient wisdom traditions.
Right.
But, that was, just kind of an impulse initially, and it felt we did it for our own house, and it looked good, it looked right, and galleries picked it up, and here we are. But that thing that was initially an intuitive thing to do, it's I came across a book recently called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, and it describes everything that Shana just mentioned, how phonetic language structure that is referenced in the book of Formation, the Sefer Yetzirah, which is something that Manly P. Hall talks about a lot, goes into specifically how the word within the Judeo-Christian Abrahamic religion tradition manifests the world. The word is what is the creative force in the world. I mean, for me personally, and I don't want this to become a lecture on the merits of that or not. These are just the ingredients and the sources of inspiration for the art and how it relates to language. But, for me, like, I would say that thoughts are causative and language is the symbolic placeholder. I'm going to back up one more layer. Emotions and feelings are causative that generate a thought,
Right.
that then takes on a symbol and a symbol system of language or math or art or drawings. Those enter into the world and become reality. But the demiurge or the tetragrammaton or the creator, the workman God, used language in the word to build the entire universe. And the book of Formation goes into specifically how that is done. And that was totally fascinating. And that, in light of this idea that the phonetic language structure that this entity used, that is commonly known or referred to as a male deity, a patriarchal deity, also created an imbalance towards left brain thinking, which also correlates with right-handedness, and which is the linear, rational, masculine hemisphere of the brain, which again is that dualistic thinking. So it's like culturally we're out of balance as a result of having an operating system in our brains of a phonetic language structure. And the pictographic is a right brain, the hieroglyphic pictographic language structure that replaced, and is a right brain. And those cultures were more goddess oriented and more rooted in the natural world. And so cutting up phonetic language and turning it into pictographic pictures intuitively turns out to be a subversive act against the demiurge to move back towards the goddess. Now that was not intentional, because I wasn't even but that's what's happening.
Yeah.
That's what's going on in this work.
And they're not just pictures, right? They're like vortices or something. So they're also kind of these energy activator. I mean, that have that mandalic quality to them that has uses in other traditions, and I think too, there's something about I think that there's something in the human, I don't know where in the brain, I don't want to say lizard brain like in a bad way, but down there, right, is the thing that makes otherwise rational, well-educated, articulate adults love to text each other emojis. And I think there's something that we might just experience as like vaguely juvenile cuteness and a little chance for a pun or something, but that actually kind of does scratch a little bit of that itch to communicate in a way that transcends written.
I agree. And I actually love emojis for that reason.
Yeah.
And my favorite texts, they're often replies to something that I wrote in structured language.
Yeah.
But they speak volumes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And the little moment of figuring it out is such a connectivity. You weren't doing that with the words, And so I really do, kind of secretly love it. And I don't know if it probably drives Osceola crazy that I do it, but once we started talking about this, I began to wonder, what that was about, aside from just like a little bit of fun. And it occurred to me that it was a thing that you actually had a real chance of really communicating with someone across a language barrier.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have a cousin in Holland and his wife does not speak English, but I can read a little bit of Dutch and I respond in emojis. And of course that works wonderfully. And yeah, I mean.
So that's, down here and
Yeah.
it's kind of cute, but that's the whole continuum that all of this exists on.
There's also so much more that comes with a well-placed emoji or pictogram that it's taking a context into account and obviously responding to that. But there's a lot more, it's packing a lot more information than you would think.
Like the eggplant emoji?
I was thinking about the
God.
pear.
Oh, the peach.
The peach, yes.
Well, I mean, that's
Um,
part of it. It has simultaneous meanings.
Yeah, Shane is like, oh,
Well,
here we
we're all
go.
thinking it, but of
Yeah.
course,
Oh,
now it's on.
I was thinking about the lightning bolt. I'm just gonna
Oh.
say.
Little lightning bolt, but
Yeah.
they all, when I found the swirl one, the like spiral swirl one, I was elated. I was like, oh, this is all purpose.
yeah.
No, but there's actually, like, to be serious for a minute, there, when Me Too movement was happening, right? That it's Me Too that we all think of that, okay, that's, English, right? And it wasn't going to be like necessarily that it would become like moi aussi in France or something, anch'io in Italy. It was the Me Too movement. So what do you do with that? And there was some government censorship going on in, well, not necessarily government censorship, but sort of like social approbation that came extra along with joining on to the Me Too hashtag, I think in Japan. And so what Japanese women did was they started adding a rabbit and a cup of tea, because the words are me and two, if you say it
Yeah.
out loud, but it's
Yeah.
a picture of a rabbit and a cup of tea. And that was how they got around it. And for whatever reason, I will never forget that. Because it worked for them and what that can be. So scale that up
Yeah.
to like how we're communicating as a species and how we're designing the environments we live in and how we're articulating our relationship to nature. And I feel like that's, again, where a show like this has advice, almost practical, almost advice to offer.
I would agree. And I think, just one last thing about the goddess culture and they say that matriarchal cultures were more oral based and song based, and that patriarchal cultures began to write things down. But the problem is once you write something down, it's fixed.
Right.
And there's no more room for evolution.
Yeah. There's the
I'm
parable
oversimplifying, of course.
of the, like, I don't
Well,
know
the
how true.
Homeric tradition that
Yep.
was generations of spoken and then boom,
Yep.
or I don't know, the Bible.
No, exactly. And so no, but it's really true.
right?
And
Yeah.
so gospels and things like that, ways that you would communicate these things could be updated by the reader, by the singer, and Psalms, and integrate new knowledge.
And contemporary circumstance, context.
Precisely. So where they got in trouble was they fixed the language, and then, Earth is much older than 6 million years.
Mhm.
And what do? Behead him.
But somebody wrote it down,
Yeah.
So it must be true. Yeah.
burn the witch.
Burn the witch. So that's where it gets. It gets
Yeah,
tricky.
even the oral stuff activates both hemispheres of the brain. And
Yes.
of course, callosum sends information back and forth, because there's more than just the visual spotlight vision on text, which is a cone-based vision, and rod-based vision is the broad pattern recognition
Right.
vision. And the oral tradition did have integration of the poles and the duality of your brain, and the written didn't. I mean, there's a parable, I don't know if it's, or a legend, if it's true or not, but it's apropos that when the Egyptians got the written word and, starting to replace the pictographic. Scribe was all excited, we'll never forget again one of your oral teachings and lessons. And the wise priest was like, no, you think that this is a tool for remembering, and it's actually a tool for forgetting. That, you're losing the juice.
Sort of like every phone number.
Well, but seriously,
that's
every
true.
technological advance is a
Yeah.
tool for forgetting.
Yeah,
You use Google Maps long enough and you
Right.
forget how to get somewhere without it.
right.
You can call up a fact on your phone so you don't, I remember my phone from when I was a kid,
Yeah,
from when I was 8,
yeah,
and my own. Everything else, I'd be screwed.
yep.
So, but and it's been documented. People really worried about this. Like, if you weren't going to sing it anymore, how would you remember it? Because it was a
Right.
mnemonic.
Yeah,
And so that's been proven. And I'm, clearly it continues. As I vamp for time to figure out what next slide I'm going to put up. I actually wanted to say too, that one of the things I was thinking about that you said, Shana, that really spoke to me is that I had a very powerful experience when I was young with abstract art. And I had that feeling where I was looking at something beyond language and it was communicating to me something beyond that. And it's interesting how your work does that, abstract work does that. And I actually feel like some of the schematics of Buckminster Fuller do that. I'm going to see if I can find this one. I had it up a little earlier, but this to me is such a mesmerizing mandala. It's a sketch for a golf dome in Tokyo. But look at that. That's sacred geometry right there. And here's Ram Dass, and it's not all that different. These are forms that can transport you, and they're focal points for energy. And they're, you wouldn't think that a technical drawing could be such an abstract piece, and yet I feel like that's a portal that I'm traveling through.
well, thanks to Jamie and Snyder and Alexandra Snyder May, who we're lucky enough to have with us tonight. They donated their grandfather, Buckminster Fuller's personal library to Southern Illinois University, which I helped promote there. And it was 3,500 volumes, and we went through all of them to categorize them, catalog them. And just, with, you say, the diagram can be revealing. We're all familiar with the coronavirus graphic, protein spikes, the ball coming out of it. Bucky's personal library was just full of academic journals from the 50s and 60s on RNA virus shell construction. And which, when you say something like, oh, the geodesic dome works because it builds the way nature builds. Well, that's like a really, really specific and concrete way in which he examined one of the most strong and robust structures, which we're finding out is all too true, that the RNA virus shell is the underlying lattice and structure there is a geodesic sphere. Everywhere where there's an intersecting points, that's where the protein spike pops out. And when Omicron became more infective, they said because it has more protein spikes, it just increased the frequency of triangulation underneath of it. And underlying all that is an icosahedron. Like all geodesic lattices are icosahedrons, which is a Platonic solid, which really is something that PRS and Manly P. Hall and the wisdom traditions are all very much concerned with. That was just it's just further evidence that if we root ourselves in our endeavors and our construction in creation, and reflect nature's patterns and in it, then it will work. It's just it's simultaneously mystical and very concrete and rational.
Yeah, it does work. And I mean, a lot of those you talked about Pythagoras before, a lot of that, sort of golden ratio and all of that, and the different, those were established partly because they were deemed to be the most pleasing to the eye and therefore expressive of the highest level of human ingenuity, creativity, precision, perfection, whatever in their engineering. in their decorative elements, in their layout, in their tiling, in their architect and everything. That, you know, that's why it was derived ultimately from, as you said a minute ago, the feeling like, oh, okay, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Let's make that the pivot point, and then we'll build on that. And everything, at least certainly Western, has spun out from that formulation, right up into the things on the wall. But like there's you know, if you peel the onion back far enough, at the heart of it was somebody who was like, wow, that's really beautiful.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's interesting how
And that's what happened.
it's
Yeah.
aesthetically pleasing. Which goes into ideas about beauty equating to harmony and balance
And true.
balance and truth
According
and
to some poets.
scales of justice are indicators of harmony. So
Mhm.
what is true? You know, we need, you know, jurisprudence, you know, law to find out, you know, to balance and weigh and, you know, find the truth.
Right.
It's pretty much everything. It is, at least it feels that way.
Yeah. I would agree. You know, and I think it's interesting because some of these things, you know, what Shana was talking about is because something structurally sound or complete feeling, it feels good, you know. And it doesn't mean the form can't be sophisticated. It can be incredibly sophisticated and seemingly chaotic, and yet it makes sense. But then there's also the idea that, you know, ways that we like systems. So for instance, symmetry is incredibly important to human beings because we are symmetrical. And the more symmetrical,
Almost.
well, almost, yeah,
But that's the thing. We know we're actually not.
correct.
And so some part of the unconscious brain back in there was looking for that. It turned, you know, there's all those studies that, you know, the things we find beautiful in people's faces are the more symmetrical the faces.
Yep.
Even though perfect symmetry in a human would actually not be possible. And
It's disturbing.
and that's a whole other spin off into, like, you know, the uncanny valley and all
Yep.
of that. But like, there is this idea that it's, you know, in patterns, you know, in birds and butterflies and whatever, like all the things, reflections, that there is an affinity for, if not perfect symmetry, at least balance.
Right. And that's, you know, that's by design. I mean, a plane looks like it does because they were looking at birds. And, you know, right down
And
the
birds
street.
look like they do because it works.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, if you go down the street to JPL, they'll tell you, you know, that the reason that what they study to figure out how to make solar panels fit inside a fuselage is dragonflies or cicadas. You know,
JPL,
yeah,
is that
a
the
jet
one,
propulsion library.
Jack Parsons?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Which is another rational and mystical.
We don't have time.
We don't have time for
Yeah,
that.
we don't have. Well, a quick aside
Put
for the
a
folks
pin
at
in that.
home.
We're not going down the Jack Parsons rabbit hole
Don't do it.
tonight.
Stop
We're
it.
not allowed
Do it
to.
later.
Fair
Jack
enough.
Parsons.
Fair
You
enough.
know, I want to mention one of the, like, from the personal library of Buckminster Fuller, that when, you know, the Carbondale folks, when they were trying to, you know, Bucky had a house in Carbondale. That was his dome home. And it was in disrepair. And one of his colleagues, Bill Perk, who unfortunately passed this year, identified that the dome, Bucky's and Ann's home, needed to be preserved. And, you know, they knew I was an alumni, and they wanted to do a fundraising campaign. And they said, you know, let's make some promotional material to raise money to preserve the dome. And someone suggested in the board meeting, well, let's make the fundraising thermometer look like something, you know, Bucky like. So, you know, triangles, and we're talking like that. And so I thought, okay, well, let's do the aerial view of his house. It's made up of triangulation. Each triangle will be a fundraising value. But, you know, the sides of the dome are foreshortened when you're looking at it. So flattening it out, it turned into these shapes that I've been obsessed with, you know, the geoflake shape. But so coincidentally, when I was doing that process, I was reading a book on the Tree of Life, a mystical Kabbalah, and the Tree of Life diagram jumped out of the geodesic geometry because it was at the front of my mind. So that the slide David has up is the aerial view of Buckminster Fuller's house. And after we did the work, I just overlaid a tree of life diagram from the Kabbalah over the top of it. And you can essentially rotate it 72 degrees around the central pentagon 5 times, and it creates all of the vertices of the geodesic sphere. Now, I started asking all the academic folks in the Bucky world, was Bucky interested in the Kabbalah or mystical Judaism or the tree of life? And it was like, no, that's woo-woo. That's not, no. This is a man of science and rational engineering. And he is, but it's grounded in a tradition. And part of the donation was another revelatory thing among those 3,500 volumes. And one of the 2 most notated and had the most marginalia in it was the book on the mystical Judaism, the Kabbalah, and the tree of life. Now, I am not saying that Bucky based his geodesic patterns off of the tree of life diagram, but I think that if you follow a certain line of logic and inquiry and reasoning that's rooted in nature, and you're trying to build a ladder or a bridge between the material and mundane to the divine and the ethereal, that you're going to arrive at the same place, because there is objective truth out there to be discovered. And it was discovered by Bucky. It was discovered by the folks that, gave us all these wisdom traditions and diagrams. And, language is all a part of that. Language is a key part of the Kabbalah and the Sefer Yetzirah, which is, at the root of a lot of this work. Another odd, unexpected connection to all of this language use and ancient wisdom traditions and the use of the word in a creative force and is the whole graffiti art movement that came out of the South Bronx. A group in particular that I've had the pleasure to get to know a couple people from, one of which is here, Cool Core, the TMK, which were the generals of a guy named Rammelsy, who could remember past lives working as a Gothic monk doing illuminated manuscripts. He would work on the drop capital letter as a medieval monk, illuminating manuscripts. And to hear him tell it, he could remember that. And he brought that remembrance and knowledge and wisdom to the letter formation and creation of graffiti art, and took a few teenagers under his wing, like Cool Core, Torika Black, A1. Rammelsy actually named A1, and the tie-in with this whole Sefer Yetzirah and ancient wisdom traditions there is that when, in the Sefer Yetzirah, it describes how the word created the world. And there was initially the Ein Sof, which was a circumference outside of which there was nothing, that then contracted to a single point, enter Big Bang, that single point, which is that single point is the workman God or the creator God. And then the first emanation of material existence that came out from it was called the absoluthic world, or A1. Rammelsy named his first acolyte or general A1. So there is, without a doubt, an awareness there of Rammelsy. And, if it was transmitted from working as a Gothic monk who was, interpreting mystical Hebrew texts that were possibly taken during the Crusade back to medieval, monasteries, maybe valid.
Okay.
But there was also a thing happening in that same time period, the emergence of the nation of gods and earth, or the 5% nation, which is kind of a folk version of the Nation of Islam that splintered off in Harlem and in the South Bronx and in that area, that is the origin of the hip hop idiom use of word as an affirmative, in the filmmaker Jim Jarmusch was credits Rammelsey. That was the first person that he heard say word in that way. But it definitely goes back to this Abrahamic religion idea that word manifest and created the material world. And you know,
But here's the thing
yeah,
too, right?
thanks.
Like, in case you're wondering if this is all just, you know, ancient shit and will it be on the test or whatever, on Saturday, no, I'm serious, right? On Saturday, the same day that you were having an opening of this show here, totally unplannedly and previously unbeknownst to you, an exhibition of a survey of Ramsey's visual art and design object output opened at Jeffrey Deitch's gallery in Hollywood.
Yep.
And so that's right now. And so there's an audience right now. And there's people within the art world who understand that the objects made in this way are compelling visually as well as for other reasons. And that there's a cultural resonance to whatever shifts are happening now. New generations are getting interested in these guys again. And what that looks like, you know, it can look like a lot of things, but at the moment, I find it interesting that it's really made its way into the echelons of the art world. I mean, I come from an art critic, so, but it's just like another not even parallel, but like nested universe of art history that has existed this whole time. Because all of these people were making or causing to be made visual objects that were used as rituals, as reminders, as, you know, decorations that activated spaces in certain ways, you know, the integration with the architecture, obviously. And so I think that connectivity between made objects that you can, you know, take off one wall and bring home and put on yours instead, like we understand art as an art object with these kinds of roots, I think was not the currency of what was contemporary or, you know, hip, or, you know, that kind of sincerity and that kind of true mysticism. I mean, there's a trope that everyone, at least in the LA art world, certainly knows that it didn't matter what you really were up to. You did not say your art was spiritual. That word was like stricken. Artists were not allowed to say it. There was an understanding you wouldn't be taken seriously the second you admitted that your practice had spiritual connotations. And I always thought that was cruel and stupid, but I wasn't the one making the rules. But it doesn't matter because that rule no longer exists. In fact, it's almost the pendulum is swung of the other side. And it's like, you better have some kind of spiritual intention, awareness, something happening below the surface. Like the days of something just being cool to look at are over. Well and truly over, at least for now. So everything's a cycle, but right, we're not in eye candy mode right now. And I think, you know, this is all part of that. And so, you know, again, like we were joking before we started, you know, what is time?
Right.
Because it feels like yesterday, and here we are.
Well, and I mean, there's a lot of, you know, to your point too, there's a lot of spiritual qualities that were hidden, you know, back in the day. So
Right,
for
it
instance,
was
John
hidden
Cage.
maybe from persecution, then it was hidden from sophistication.
Sophistication.
Then it was,
Yeah.
then it was hidden from commercial.
Right. But you know, if you think about some of the work that Rauschenberg was doing and Johns was doing, and they were highly influenced by John Cage, you know, there is a thread of spirituality there. Yeah, go.
Several of the names that you just mentioned were all attendees of Black Mountain College.
Yes.
Where Buckminster Fuller taught.
Yeah. Let's
Okay.
let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
Time for the people who are being so lovely and
It's
my
only,
question.
it's 8.
It's 8 o'clock.
I got a thread.
It feels like 4 hours.
I got to thread a few more things together here from the Black Mountain, Rauschenberg.
Yeah, I want to hear this. So all those people.
Yeah, John Cage attended. So, you know, Black Mountain College in North Carolina was a very progressive school. It was, we got blessed by the brain drain that came out of Germany and the Bauhaus at the rise of right-wing fascism. Actually, we were the benefactors, having a more permissive and liberal society we got all the brightest people in Germany to come here, one of which Joseph Albers and Annie Albers, founded Black Mountain College, and they were wise enough to bring Bucky in. And that was a place that was so wide open and so permissive and exploratory and hands-on, where the learning model was just doing projects. And that's what Bucky loved. Some people have said, well, Bucky wasn't a teacher. Well, he was a co-discoverer and, person who guided wonder. And that was what was going on in Black Mountain. That's what accounts for all these folks. Now, so another way that touches the graffiti art movement and TMK and Ramelzy and Jean-Michel Basquiat wanted and sought Ramelzy's approval in some ways, in Cool Core and Toxic and A1. Tox and Cool Core were in the Mitchell homes. Jean-Michel did big paintings of the Mitchell homes. He did portraits of them all. But what the connection of Jean-Michel to the Black Mountain thing is that Cy Twombly was a student of Black Mountain. Cy Twombly was one of the first artists to begin just doing graphomania, text-based artwork. That was the innovation, that just canvases loaded with scrawling text and a loose hand was an art object, and that was given permission. Jean-Michel saw that and thought, I want to do that. And Cy Twombly was a huge influence on Jean-Michel Basquiat. Jean-Michel wanted to meet Cy Twombly and was barred from doing it by his assistants on, flat out racism. I mean, they thought based on his appearance that he wouldn't be a serious person and would possibly want to steal something from his studio. So Jean-Michel didn't get to meet his hero, Cy Twombly, but he was influenced by him, and it led back to the open, permissive, and innovative environment that Bucky was a part of it at Black Mountain College.
Yeah.
And right around that time, like in the 60s and whatever, Lawrence Weiner, who just died, who's had an amazing show at Regan Projects, tribute to him.
Yeah.
All the artists that came after him, your Ed Rusches. I mean, basically, but this idea that was also right around that time of using text in art became a thing that was like, well, you can't, it's basically impossible to both see and read at the same time, which is something you alluded to earlier in the conversation. It's a situation with written language. And so, of course, that's an amazing topic for visual artists to explore. What is the difference? What part of this is the content, right? Is when I say a bunch of logs stacked end to end by a river, is the content the picture, the watercolor you just painted in your mind of a river with some wood? Is it the physical letters on this wall in this place? Is it the abstract patterns of, like, let's say you couldn't read English, what would you be seeing? Because it's still an object though, but without that content. But again, what was content in it, right? And that sort of place that you get to just thinking about that stuff, it's so deceptively simple. It's literally some words on the wall, but it's this kind of pie, like you can't get all the way to the end of it. Mm-hmm. And so many artists who came out of, who like never got over that riddle, right? Have never solved it, and it's still proliferating. And I absolutely feel like, graffiti and the writing, specifically the writers, in street art carried that torch. And I feel like that's, part of your conversation about language too. Because even with the deconstructed ones, there's ones, these ones are, abstract in that sense. There's no image content. A lot of the ones in the gallery and in other shows you've done, you leave enough of the logo so you kind of know what it was. So, and a logo is kind of like a higher cliff too, because it's not really a word, because it's almost always spelled weird to be something, right? So you're in this very interesting kind of mushy place with the cognition, with language and image, and then cutting it up and reassembling it. But I feel like I can never really tell you exactly what it is, but I know exactly what it is. Eventually you realize, like, that's a clown. Now, if you're like me, it doesn't matter what anything else is because you're just in your I'm terrified of clowns place. But you know, someone else is going to
Clown
experience
prosperity.
that as a much happier you know, set of memories or something. So there's information, but it's subverted, but it's not erased, you know, and the way that you're leaving elements that both make a visual abstract pattern, but also still have enough content to kind of snag your brain as you're moving across the work. I find that is the tradition that it belongs in art, you know, in contemporary art.
That's one of the first decisions that I make in the process. You know, there's the process is like the treasure hunt and the finding and the accumulating of the material medium. And then the next decision, you know, is the deconstruction. And it's like, well, how large do you cut the triangle into? And it's the size of the letters in the sign are determine the size of the triangle, so that it just confuses you enough that, like, you know, that there's letters there, but they also just take on the form of an abstract pictographic feeling. And it just draws you in to try to resolve the puzzle, you know, like of what it was previously, you know, and that it just feels right, because, you know, that's what you hate to throw away the material heritage of the 20th century. And, you know, we shouldn't, but it has to be transformed and it has to be transmuted. And the polarities have to be integrated.
Literally
So,
and figuratively. Like
Yeah.
we have to clean up the country and the infrastructure physically. Like we can't just leave buildings to rot wherever they
Right.
fall, right? We have to tidy the place up a little bit, but not it, you know, but landfills aren't just like a thought bubble somewhere, it's real. So what can you adaptively reuse and repurpose? That's an ecological decision. Forget anything else. That's
Right.
just, you know, if you can at all use reclaimed anything, do it, period, in whatever sphere of your
A
life.
shocking data point is that almost half the volume of our landfills is construction and deconstruction waste. So, you know, that's a huge thing.
But
And
it's also a spiritual cleaning up and reconstituting. We need
Yeah.
to take this history apart and put it back together better.
with this whole kind of separate yet Zyro tradition that the word manifests the world, and that the advertising tropes are the things that we're most exposed to. And they didn't do away with that idea. They convinced, you know, everyone else was like, wow, that's, you know, ancient superstition and hooey. Well, they leaned into it, you know, and they co-opted that magic and literally would put letters in a sequence to spell and simultaneously cast a spell to make you think you're not good enough, make you think you don't have enough, make you think that, you know, particularly women in the natural world are objects. These are all functions of advertising.
And artists like Wallace Berman and Robert Heineken, they knew it. You
Yeah.
know, there were people that were onto them from the beginning.
I want to, if you don't
Berman.
mind, I want to share a couple anecdotes too, like where it's, you know, so the idea of this ritualized practice of making these objects, like to what end?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like to make decoration for people's homes. You know, that's not like, it's about actually transmuting the taking the material and working on it as a placeholder for the culture and world at large. Like, and it's just a place like when you're aggravated, me personally, and you feel powerless to affect change, that you invest that emotion in the material objects that are placeholders for the things that you want to transform. And doing the work, actually, if you do it with the juice of real heartfelt emotion, they go into the world and you actually see a feedback. You actually see results from this. One to tie in with Buckminster Fuller's house, the eclipse transited over Bucky's house in 2017. That fame in Carbondale was one of the only college towns that it went over. The board there was like, we need someone to stay in the house because it's not finished, it's not secure. There's gonna be a lot of
Enough about the kids today that someone's going to be like, hey, the Buckminster Fuller dome's unlocked. Let's go.
Let's get in there.
Solar eclipse. Yeah.
So I volunteered to stay in Bucky and Ann's house for the eclipse, and I thought, well, this is awfully auspicious. Like, I want to go wherever I felt like he would have had the most residual energy. And I thought, well, he has a loft library in his house, a circular loft library. And my wife can testify that I've made a kind of a story for our kids based off of like Scooby-Doo episodes and, old Hammer mystery shows, that bookcases in libraries represent portals. And that's evidenced by the fact that whenever there's the secret lab or the secret space, it's always behind the bookcase. And then that movie, it was an Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey, came out. He went through a black hole and communicated with his family through the bookcase. Yep. And I was like, see. And then so going into, I'm like, well, I have to do it in the library because that's where, and I half believe this when I was telling it to my kids, but now I fully believe it, that the residual energy of the writer of the book and the multiple readers of the book and the sharing of the book and the buildup of all of that talismanic object energy does open up something. So that was where I said, thank you, Bucky. Thank you for your life's work. Thank you for your legacy. And if I can help promote it in some small way, thank you for that as well. And it was nice. And his ghost did not materialize out. He didn't come out of the bookcase, but yeah. So, we went on and I had an art show to get ready for. And I was feeling like the angular, triangulated geometric art was all very angular, and I wanted to soften it with curves. I was finding letters like S's and C's to try to work and soften the corners a little bit. So I thought, well, what do I have to do? I'm going to start painting over it, and I'm going to do some circles. And so I got my daughter's hula hoop, which is perfect also, and drew these circles and made them overlap. And then these vesica piscis shapes started coming out of it, overlapping circles. And once enough of the work got created, it was like, oh, I'm just painting the eclipse over the top of all this work. It imprinted on me in some way. And there was a final piece that I couldn't resolve, and I was struggling with it. And I was, coming in, complaining to my wife. And finally, when I realized this whole thing was about the eclipse, I'm like, well, I'm going to just lean in. The last one is called Sun Moon Download, and it's about the eclipse specifically. And so it all kind of like, the triangulation of the geodesic dome and the eclipse and the auspiciousness of that and the homage to Bucky. And ironically enough, the underpainting under this Sun Moon Download was I was painting Aleph, Mem, and Shen over the top of each other to create a kind of a glyph, which are the three mother letters within the Sefer Yetzirah. They stand for air, fire, and water, the creative forces. And I wrote them on my workbench and table in front of me as I was working on this, and so I could stay focused on it, listening to Manly P. Hall lecture about it, which was keeping my left brain busy while my right brain could like do the creative work, and my emotional juice was fully invested in it, and it got done, and I was excited. I went and got my wife. I said, I come and check it out. I think I figured it out. And I propped it up on that easel quickly, and I was showing it to her, and it slipped, and I grabbed it, and it cut my finger really badly. So I accidentally bled on it. I went into the art show, and then it was December that same year, 2017. Alexandra's brother, Jamie, called, said, I got your phone number from my mother, Allegra. And he was kind of hemming and hawing around, and he's finally said, I don't know how to really say this other than I was outside last night looking at the supermoon, and I got an overwhelming heart feeling that my grandfather's books ought to be donated back to that library space. So like that little sequence of events felt like validation. It felt like that, because it had the accidental makings of a ritualized thing. Even the blood, which I hated to even go there, but that's seriously a part of it. And then the other thing that happened, like making this show, beyond the fact that my friend Cool Core was opening an exhibition out here on Rammelsey at the same time, that coincidence was wild. But there's a piece specifically that was about addressing this phonetic language and the demiurge that may have bestowed it to us to keep focus on him. And I was in that same kind of mode, like I really thought I was doing the work to undo this patriarchal language system and turn it back into a Don't laugh. I
Yeah.
was in it and I psyched myself out. I psyched myself out. I was like, I don't want who, if this is true and I was believing that it's true, then who would I be to poke this? And I got superstitious and I'm like, I gotta walk away from this. I'm in the weeds here. And I felt I was gonna like, I'll have lunch or whatever. And I walked away from it and I heard this like zzz, zzz, zzz sound. And I thought, well, that right at the same time I was thinking, I don't want to kick that hornet's nest. I heard what sounded like a wasp. And I thought, well, that's spot on. But then I thought, well, no, that could be like a loose plug or a frayed wire. I better trace that sound down to make sure I don't burn down the studio. And I traced the sound to a pile of sawdust. And in the pile of sawdust was an Egyptian scarab beetle. No kidding. And I didn't even know we had Egyptian scarab beetles in Illinois. And there it was. And I was like, that felt like the
By the
work.
way, there's video.
There's video. This happened. And it was like, it felt like the work got done. And then the universe was like, we got you, or you know what I mean? Or the old pictographic gods or deities or agencies were like, don't worry, you're not alone in this endeavor. That's the picture. That was the picture of the actual beetle. I got it out of the sawdust. I put it with the art and it hung around for a while. And then it curled up into that little shape that looks exactly like the amulet. And that felt like at that point, like the work was done. You know what I mean? Like the metaphysical work, like the energy work. Yeah.
I know there's something I've been dying to talk
Okay.
about that this formed a perfect segue to, not the least of which, because I see the curve of one of your eclipsed.
Oh yeah.
Totems
Eclipse
there.
totems in there. Yeah.
It is there was lunar eclipse last night. And
Forgot about that little bit of
yeah,
meaningful coincidence.
So let's talk about these bad boys.
Yeah, those were an attempt like to give homage to the idea that these planetary alignments, these bigger patterns than the human the integration of the solar and the lunar in particular and are a reflection of this integration of masculine and feminine. And it's this integration of polarities again. And it's just the thinking was like something special happened on the eclipse. I feel a strong resonance with that. I want to make some totemic, talismanic objects that pay homage to that. And the fact that it's eclipse today was again a coincidence. But the use of telephone poles was kind of an intentional thing because it's like that's the architecture of communication. Hermes and Hermetic stuff is about communication. Herms are also things that were in ancient times like on the path, like wayfinding stones. Those were called herms. So it's like when you're on your journey, you're on your path. Posting online communication, communication with ethereal realms, communication with planetary bodies.
No, but there's all these like mythological traditions where, you've got a thing like that. And, when the sun shines at a certain angle during like this solstice or that equinox, just like how you designed your house, that angle will pass through this thing. And that, a lot of that is sort of, fantasy literature, but it comes from somewhere. And obviously, right.
Yeah.
And so I think that, there are contemporary artists who work in ways like this too. I was looking at the mini world and thinking about James Turrell. I was, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's a lot of these. And by the way, I don't know if there's anyone in here who wasn't able to go in the gallery beforehand. It'll be open afterwards. But the scale of these are so perfect that you almost can't tell in photographs. They almost could be hand.
Yeah.
They're tall person, like druid height, right? But they absolutely relate to the body. So you start to think about what are yoga poses, what are sun salutations, why does the Joshua tree look like it's in prayer, like what, and that there are all those kinds of elements that are absolutely at work in them as well. And a lot of, the patterning, the painting, you know, and what would they be decorated with? Shiny stones and shells and the things that were found in nature that seem to have a special quality that would be set aside for use in important ritual sacred objects. And so how different is that really than this? And it's like, it's not different at all. And then of course it's very different. So because this is almost the opposite of sacred, shiny, special stuff, it's like discarded stuff that needed rescuing.
It's literally
it's
all
really
good.
the
It's
same.
all good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything's good.
Right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's what I mean. And
Yeah.
so you know, like there's a lot of that kind of resonance moving through the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I said to Benjamin too, I think of the, you know, their telephone poles, obviously, and I think of the end work both as receivers, but also as transmitters.
Exactly.
that.
Amplifiers, all those things.
Yeah,
The other odd thing is like when you start working with lunar shapes, you automatically like Astarte, who is the you know, the prototypical essential goddess, had that lunar crescent behind her that also took on the form of horns or bull horns.
Yep.
And, you know, part of the transitioning off of the goddess to the, you know, the patriarchal word giver, God, was that those things all were demonized.
right.
You know, the devil definitely has horns, you know, you know, but Astarte had horns, and you know, the sacred geometry, pentagons, pentagrams, all of that forms the geodesic lattice are all, you know, it's full of ancient wisdom tradition symbols, hexagrams, hexagons, pentagrams, but those aren't there for that reason. They're there as reflections of the way nature builds, and
But they're there for the same reasons as in the first place.
yes,
Yeah,
because
They're not a literary reference to that book or tradition.
Right.
They were derived in the same way that book or tradition derived them from nature.
examination of nature and exploration of nature and natural forms, and understanding
Well, I
Yeah.
think that's crucial because really in the end, when you get to it in the back of it, you know, this is also, you know, you're an artist, right? And so these are, you know, non-denominational objects in that
Right,
sense,
yes.
right? They're, you know, they're here for you. They have this energy, use them as you see fit. But, you know, you're also working in the very fine tradition of, you know, a visual artist making works for wall and floor and building that are, you know, again, like the original theorists or whatever about pleasure and perfection. And it's like people respond to them in an individual way and want them in their homes.
Yeah,
in the
you can
same way they
buy them
art.
if you want to.
Yeah, they're all for sale.
Yeah, you can have them in your home if you'd like.
I was making that clear.
We won't hold you back.
But you know, that's right. And so it is all of that stuff, but it's not for like a reliquary that you
Right.
have, that like a few lucky you get to do a crazy pilgrimage of insane sacrifice for.
Not
It's like,
yet.
it's a free art show in Los Feliz. Come check it out.
Yeah.
And so there's, you know, there's all of that stuff, but it's not locked away.
Yeah.
It's not in an apps. It's not in Latin that you wouldn't understand even if you could read. It's like, it's here for you.
Yeah.
And I feel like that, you know, that's worth something as well. It sort of has a folk art quality to it in
It's
that
true.
way that's incredibly warm and incredibly accessible just aesthetically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not this, you know, it
I
has all
wasn't
the
sh-
power,
yeah,
but
I wasn't
it's-
sure about that
but
folk
it's
art
cozy.
label at first, but it's appropriate.
It
It
is.
is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is.
No,
Yeah.
I get what you mean, but
Yeah, well, it ties in good with a Bucky quote of dare to be naive, which is something that, you know, it's a naive approach to making and art making, of just believing that you can do it. It's informed by, you know, not naive. Another etymology on naive is native. So, you know, it's something
something there.
primal, something original, something untainted, unspoiled, and that's folk art has that. And you know, again, like it's another interesting correlation. You know, using the found objects, using things that would, like you were saying, religious objects might be made out of precious things, but these things are made out of discarded things. That's something that Rammelsy also did. He had a whole collection of these suits that he would wear to perform in, and they were called garbage gods, that they're made out of found objects that he found throughout the city. And it was,
Right.
yeah, the other correlation there again is that Rammelsy and the TMK crew operated under this idea that the planet was on quarantine by some extra dimensional beings that were using it as a betting parlor. And what they were betting on were the letter races. And so you have the double entendre about, race and how language grants or bars access to power, and your facility with language and your use of language. And you have corporate symbols and logos competing for attention inside of an urban space. And that since he could remember his work doing illuminated manuscripts, he said, you can inform your graffiti writing with this same magical practice and gain name fame for yourself. And it worked. Hip hop and graffiti art culture are the dominant global culture. And it worked. And it's an odd thing for me, like a rural, country boy, I got curated with some urban graffiti artists because of the tie over is manipulating and working with text. And, Cool Core and I were in a show together out in New York, that just an odd coincidence. Like I didn't even have the money for a hotel. I was sleeping in my back of my station wagon in Manhattan. And I drove around and I found a full disclosure. Yeah, I drove around and there was a parking spot that I felt like, well, this looks like I could probably stay here for a while in this spot. And I waited for someone to come out of the building. I said, is this cool if I were? They're like, you got lucky. You get to be there till next Tuesday when the street sweeper comes through. I was like, yes, this is my new apartment here. And Cool Core and I were on the roof of the building we were exhibiting in. And I said, hey, I'm parked. You can see my car from here. And Cool was like, you're parked in front of the battle station. It was Rammelsey's studio, and he had since passed. And he was in a rent controlled building in Tribeca where he was doing this work in. Then, Cool and I, we did a show together in St. Louis at the Cherokee Street Gallery, and Cool, sourced material from the area, metal work shelves, and he was doing his abstracted, brushstroke letter forms over the top of them, and he wanted to get a sense of the area. He wanted to understand the vibe and the energy of St. Louis and East St. Louis, and we went to the Dome, and we went to Miles Davis's house and checked it out, and then he was ready to work, and he was producing beautiful stuff. And I came and checked it out, and those shelves, those metal work shelves, were leaned up against the wall in the space he was working in. And he says, I'm like, man, those are gorgeous. He's like, if you can tell me what their title, I will eat my hat. And I was like, okay, I'm going to really attempt this. And the way that they were lined up on the wall, I was thinking, again, like these seemed like progression. This seems like, almost like milestones. And I said the word milestones, and he flipped out because he named them Miles Tones after Miles Davis's album. And I thought they were milestones, which it was just one of them things. It was like a little wink or a nod or indicator of like, you're working, you're in your lane.
You're in the right place.
Yeah, you're in your lane. You're with your people. He said, thank God I didn't have a hat at the time, right? Yeah.
Metaphor.
But anyway, that's further. I bring up that stuff just because it feels like real world anecdotes and evidence of meaningful coincidence. Yeah. And if you're, in the Jungian sense, that even the scarab showing up. That's like one of Jung's most famous stories of when he's having a session in his book on synchronicity. A scarab beetle comes to the window and wants in the session at a auspicious time. Yeah, and there's David's holding up a book from the PRS library, which coincidentally also.
Also for sale, yeah.
But there's no need to like really like understand what's happening, but it's just like, just like keep working in that lane.
Well, I mean, I move through life this way too, but it's that thing where it's not, I don't like forecast or, you know what I mean? But I do believe in things like that as sort of signs of that you've already made the right choice. You've already put yourself on the right path. You've already done it. And so like, oh, am I supposed to be here? I'm not sure. Oh, a flock of monarch butterflies. Yeah, maybe this is where I'm supposed to be. And those little things that, could be complete coincidences, could be glitches in the matrix, could be, the programmer of the sim got high. I don't know. Nobody knows. But it has that feeling of sort of recentering you.
Absolutely.
And feeling able to proceed with a little bit more of sort of confidence that you're going in the right direction. And I think that the more you cultivate that, the more it happens. And maybe that's just the more you think of it, the more you notice it. Like that's just how the brain works.
If
we've all experienced it.
Yes.
If we were to the Hermetic tradition and the tradition expressed in Bucky's geodesic dome, that's a microcosm of the universe, and the human body is a microcosm of the universe. These are Hermetic traditions. Like there's the macroprosophos and the microprosophos, and it's all one. It's where we would be inside of the God body as like the gut bacteria is inside of us. We can affect the health of the overall system, whether we benefit the health of the system or we are hurting the health of the system. So there's a single universal organism that our behavior affects. And these synchronicities and coincidences are feedbacks from the universal, giving indication and symbols that we are operating in our lane,
Right.
in our
and architecture and art objects like this are talismans that are periodic reminders to get back in touch with that if it's something that's important to you, right?
Amen.
Yes.
So
No, I think that's a great place
Yeah.
to stop.
Okay.